Thanks, Georgina. That was a really interesting discussion. Welcome, everybody. We hope you've been enjoying your time at the Future of Product Management Summit. My name is Paul Young.
And I'm Amy Graham.
And we are instructors with Pragmatic Institute.
Every week we work with product teams all over the world. In fact, our alumni base is about 250,000 or higher. And we've worked with over 15,000 unique companies who have come through our program.
As a result of working with all of those different people and organizations, we've generated significant data and insights into what works and also what doesn't. Georgina and the team just shared with you some really interesting data from our most recent annual survey about product teams. But we are just getting started. We have a lot more information to share with you in this session.
In today's topics, we've heard from a variety of experts about the forces that will shape tomorrow's work for product teams, like remote work, changing roles and responsibilities, and especially AI.
But even with all of the changes on the horizon, at Pragmatic, we believe that there is one constant, immutable truth that will not change, and that is the discipline to be market-driven.
Being market-driven can have many different names. When companies focus on their market by doing proactive research and generating insights that lead to product innovations, we refer to that behavior as outside in. But when teams focus on the voices inside the walls of their company, they become more inside out. And that can often lead to making questionable product decisions.
That's right. Now, with all of the recent hype around AI, we thought it'd be really interesting to highlight a pertinent example that perhaps can describe the difference between inside out and outside in. Humane has recently been in the news for their AI pin. If you're not familiar, this product was intended to replace your smartphone by providing a contextual AI-powered wearable device that you could use for things like scheduling meetings or asking questions or getting directions. Unfortunately, to say that it didn't meet the mark would be putting it lightly. Reviewers from Vibe to TechCrunch have described it as the worst product that they've ever tested. They've described it as unfinished and a complete mess. Now, while the execution of this product certainly led a lot to be desired, there's a pretty clear question that remains. What problem were they trying to solve here? What would make this more compelling than using your phone? And why did they spend so much time, money, resourcing on prototyping, go-to-market, and production to produce a product that everyone immediately trashed?
Now, even though we weren't in the room as they created this product, the answer to us is pretty clear. There was a lot of inside-out thinking going on here.
That's right. You can't just slap AI onto your product and expect it to just fly off the shelf. Now, with all the AI hype, much of it justified, it doesn't exempt us from listening to the market.
To be clear, though, it's not just startups that succumb to this issue. It happens to established companies as well.
That's right. Some of you may have recently followed the news about Sonos. Sonos makes internet-connected smart speakers, and you use an app on your phone to set up those speakers and control their products. Recently, Sonos launched a new redesign of their app that created a whole new user experience. Unfortunately, it was broken, and it eliminated some key functionality, like the ability to create and edit playlists and access local music libraries. As you might expect, their user base revolted, and Sonos was forced to backtrack. They recently had to react to the outrage because it was getting so loud by re-evaluating should they launch an old version of their app and bring it back into the market. Unfortunately, they weren't able to do that. And they've reportedly had to spend over $30 million addressing this issue, including delaying some new hardware launches.
And it's obviously impacted their bottom line as well. Take a look at this chart from the Wall Street Journal. So you can see here that their new app launched, and you can tell that the line goes down and to the right, thus resulting in them losing 30% of their share value. All the while, this product category was actually growing, not shrinking.
Just to be clear, down and to the right, that's bad.
Yes,
don't want to do that.
Absolutely.
Now, I want to be clear here. Our goal with these two examples is not to make fun of, it's not to pile on for these companies in these examples, there is plenty of that online already. The point is that in both of these examples, their CEOs came out to the media and they stood up and made blog posts and podcast recordings where they blamed the failure here as a failure of execution. In other words, they didn't think that they built the AI pin or launched the app as effectively as they could have. Now, certainly there were failures of execution here that could have been prevented. But we believe that the true nature of this failure is so much deeper. It's about a failure to connect with their market and truly understand what their market wanted. Inside-out thinking is at the root cause of both of these failures, and pinning the crime on execution is masquerading the true nature of this failure.
Absolutely. Organizations and product teams have been facing several challenges and currently face several challenges, and these challenges are evolving and they're becoming more and more painful. So as the future unfolds and technology continues to evolve, practicing this outside-in approach becomes even more critical. Let's take a look at some of these challenges.
Absolutely. The rapid speed of change in today's business environment demands that organizations become or remain agile. We need to continuously adapt our strategies and invest in innovative tools and processes to stay competitive. Failing to do so could put us behind or create risks of falling behind in this ever-changing landscape. A really cool example of this is the evolution that so many of us went through during the COVID pandemic. Businesses across nearly every spectrum of the industry were forced to rapidly adopt new technologies, such as Zoom and Teams, to completely change the way that they were going to market with e-commerce and the way that they were doing something as simple as conducting an internal meeting. If you could jump in a time machine, as an example, and go back in time 5 years, sit down with an enterprise salesperson and tell them, you know what you're going to start doing? You're going to start closing 7- and 8-figure deals without ever going in person to the client and shaking their hand or seeing them in person. They would say, you're crazy. But that is something that now happens every single day.
Every day. And Paul, I don't know about you, but I'll never forget it. Like within 2 days of the world shutting down, literally, Pragmatic had completely changed our modality, the way in which we deliver. And we were up and running in a virtual environment. And I'm forever grateful that we had the speed to adapt with that change.
That's right.
So now let's talk about the relentless pursuit of innovation, which we believe is essential in order to stay ahead of the competition and to have that competitive advantage you need. But it also requires organizations are willing to take risks and that they embrace this change that is happening all around us and consistently invent new ideas and new technologies. Without this focus, we risk becoming stagnant and compliant and we'll lose our edge. A prime example of this, the relentless pursuit of innovation, I think, is Tesla's approach to the automotive industry. Tesla has a commitment to this, and you can see this. They are pushing the boundaries of the electric vehicle technology, autonomous driving, and even sustainable energy solutions. Perhaps a great proof of evidence behind this is their continuous over-the-air deployments of their updates. And they're often launching brand new features. And all of these are enhancing the way that we drive and the different capabilities that we have. And this is all well after the vehicle has been purchased.
That's right. My niece just showed me in the driveway the other day my sister-in-law's new Model 3 and was showing me all the new things that it could do just since they bought it a month or two ago.
It's incredible.
Pretty amazing. So technology advancements are reshaping every industry, and they're often doing it at an unprecedented pace, especially when we now start to consider new technologies like AI. If we want to truly harness the power and potential of these new innovations, we have to think a little bit differently. A really cool example of this right now is with the healthcare space. Google, with their DeepMind AI technology, has developed a system to analyze eye scans to detect over 50 different eye diseases, including age-related macular degeneration and diabetic retinopathy. with an accuracy comparable to leading ophthalmologists.
It's remarkable if you think about it. And in fact, Gartner predicts that by 2028, 75% of enterprise software engineers will be using AI code assistance, which is up from less than 10% in early 2023. I also read that the AI market is expected to grow to over $400 billion by 2027, according to Fortune Business Insights.
It's amazing how fast that's really taken on our industry and all industries. So in addition to all these pressures, the pressures to move faster, to adopt AI, to deal with risks, if we zoom in specifically on the product teams, the teams that many of you work within, there are some very specific challenges that we hear over and over and over again every single week in our work with product teams. Let's share a few of these with you and see if any of these resonate.
How about we start with confusion over roles and responsibilities? I know every company I have ever interacted with my time here at Pragmatic has had some flavor of confusion, some form of confusion over roles and responsibilities. Maybe they don't understand what's the difference between a product manager and a product owner. Some companies want to learn more and understand better the difference between a product marketing function and a product management function. Or maybe they're asking questions about who should be responsible for pricing, or who should be responsible for creating the business plan or the business proposal, or doing strategic product planning. Maybe they want to know who should be doing user acceptance testing. The list goes on and on and on. And we all know what happens when there's a lack of clarity around roles and responsibilities. It can lead to us sometimes duplicating efforts. Maybe you're stepping on each other's toes. Maybe we end up pointing fingers. And none of those are healthy. It all leads to incredible challenges inside of our organization.
That's right. It certainly doesn't make us faster if we're all pointing fingers at one another.
Wasted time.
Another big challenge that we hear from your peers is many teams tell us they have far too many number one priorities. As a result, they're trying to take on way too much work and they're spreading themselves far too thin. Maybe this resonates with you. Typically, the way that I see this showing up is that you or one of your product peers goes to a meeting with several different stakeholders, and all of those stakeholders have a different idea about what they think should be the number one thing. And as a result, we all argue, or maybe a better word is discuss. And we sit down, and after that discussion, what we agree is that all five of those things should elevate to become number one. So you walk away from that meeting with a list that has 27 number one priorities, two priorities, and one number three priority. I call that priority inflation, where everything goes up to become a P1. Have you ever seen that?
Oh, yes. But wait. My favorite is priority zero.
Zero. Yeah, even better. Even better than P1. And if you go far enough down this path where everything is a P1, then eventually you get into some really silly distinctions where people show up and they say, no, Amy, that's not a P1 or even a P0. That's a P1A or double A or triple A. I actually worked with a team once that had 5 A's after their top priority one item, which gets a bit silly at some point. So there's got to be a better way. Something that's more objective, less subjective, maybe something that's a bit more driven through data and the market.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the clashes now between agility and planning. The challenge really lies, though, in balancing the need for quick, flexible, immediate responses to change. But we also have to have the discipline of the strategic longer-term planning. Product teams must find a way to integrate both of these approaches into their discipline so that we can adapt rapidly while still maintaining what we're supposed to do from a business goal or objective perspective.
That's right. We also hear that many teams struggle with balancing the tactics and the strategic. And when I say they're spending too much time in the tactics, here's what I mean. They're spending too much time on the day-to-day firefighting aspect of the job. Now, there's always a fire to be fought, and firefighting is not a sin. But if you continue to jump from putting out one fire to the next fire to the next fire all day long, you know what that turns you into? I call it a professional firefighter.
Guess who the next fire is going to come to if you're really good at it?
Straight to your doorstep.
That's right.
Straight to your doorstep. Once the organization figures out that you're good at putting out fires, it goes right to you. And the really insidious thing is that some organizations tend to reward the firefighter. They say, oh, look at Amy. She swept in at the 11th hour and she saved the deal, or she, helped put out the fire. And the dangerous thing here is that once an organization starts to reward firefighters, it creates arsonists. People who learn that the way to get things done is to set a fire, and then the firefighting crew sweeps in to put it all out. So we got to change the balance here. How do we put out the fires that need to be put out while recognizing that maybe they don't all have to be? Maybe there is a time or place to balance out some of that work with the strategic side, thinking about the future, so that we don't have to find ourselves firefighting all day, every day.
How about opinion-based decision making? Many companies struggle with how they should decide what to do and what not to do. And some companies are making decisions, frankly, off of who submitted the idea, who brought the feature request forward. Or maybe some companies are operating off of what we call the hippo factor, and they're making decisions based off of the highest paid person's opinion in the room. None of those are great ways to make strategic business decisions.
That's right. I was working with a client recently that described it as, we have all these hippos that are waddling around, throwing their weight around. And to be clear, that's not market driven. That's just another form of opinions. And if the product team is arguing with a hippo or multiple hippos, you're very rarely going to win, because very rarely is your opinion going to outweigh theirs. So we got to find a different way that really brings the data to the forefront. And so how do we inject the market data into the bloodstream of the hippos? That's really what this is all about. Now, one other big challenge that we hear over and over again is pricing. How should we price our product? What should drive the price? Many teams don't really know how to price their product. They look at historical data maybe, or how it's always been done, or maybe you have a pricing committee that's really driving some of these decisions. But again, what's lacking here is market data. Many teams we work with price their product based on their internal cost to develop a solution, plus their desired margin. That's called cost plus. And typically that's not a great way to price, because the market doesn't typically care what it costs you to go build something. Right. What they care about is the value that you're bringing to them. So how do we price based on the value that we've created? And first of all, how do we even understand that value? That's very tricky for a lot of teams. And as a result, they end up pricing their product perhaps the wrong way.
And it all starts with having the data.
That's right.
So given all these challenges and what we believe to be the future of product, we want to set you up for success as you consider your part in this journey. So we'd like to ask you a question. What drives your product decisions today?
It's a great question. Now, typically, when we think about the product team and their decision process, like what do they go build? What's on their roadmap? What's going to come next? We typically find that product teams' decision processes are driven by one of a couple of different factors. The first one that I'd like to explore is what we call sales-driven. In the sales-driven organization, the sales team essentially owns and sets the roadmap based on what they need to go win the next deal, or perhaps to renew the customer they want to renew. And as a result, we tend to build exactly what sales tells us to go build.
Or you could be what we call executive or founder-driven, where the C-suite, our executive leadership team at the top, they're the ones making the decisions about what to build and what not to build. They're driving product development, and they're in charge of our roadmap.
That's right. I've definitely been there. Sometimes we also have a situation that we call engineering or development-driven. In the engineering-driven team, as you might anticipate, it's the engineering team that drives the roadmap and what we're going to go build. Usually, in my experience, those decisions are based on what is most technically interesting as a challenge for them to go undertake, or it's often based in re-architecting a platform or reducing technical debt that they are obsessed with closing out.
Let's talk about another one called big customer driven. So this is where organizations will have a tendency to drop everything and allocate all of their resources towards going and winning that big customer deal. If we go build this, we'll win this huge deal. Sound familiar?
Very familiar. In fact, every startup I've ever worked for started off here, big customer driven, maybe they were founder driven. And you could understand why. If you've got a huge deal that represents 50% or 80% of your revenue as an organization, then yeah, I want to keep that. And we never want to say no to that business. But we also have to recognize there's a difference between building for the one versus building for the many. It's a lot more effective, and we would also argue less risky, to build something once that I can sell over and over and over again than to build something once for one customer. Because what happens when that one customer, whether it's the government or Walmart or whoever, shows up tomorrow and says, you know what, Amy, that big thing that we wanted, our strategy has shifted. We are canceling this project. Sorry about that. All that revenue goes away.
That's right. That's right. Speaking of which, tell them about market-driven.
All right, so the one that we would advocate for, the one that we think is the way to go, is what we call the market-driven approach. And you might be anticipating this based on what we've talked about so far. But in a market-driven approach, the product team is going to own and drive the roadmap, not based on what they think, not based on their opinion, but based on their market research, going out there into the market, having conversations with their buyers, their users, observing them, understanding their workflows, doing quantitative research as well to validate what they've found, and then building solutions to problems that matter in the market as a whole.
Exactly. All right, so if it's not already obvious by now, our recommendation and the only good choice is to be market-driven. So become market-driven is far better and is going to create far more success for you than being led by these other factors. And in fact, there's a lot of data around this. There have been thousands and thousands of companies and individuals around the world that have taken this approach, and there's been hundreds of people who have studied this extensively. So, for example, Deloitte said that customer-centric companies are 60% more profitable. We also heard from Bain & Company that a 5% increase in your customer retention can boost your profit anywhere from 25% to 95%. The Harvard Business Review said that companies that excel at customer experience drive revenues on average 4 to 8% higher than their competitive landscape. And then we also heard from the Journal of Marketing that firms with a strong market orientation, really getting in touch and being responsive to your market's needs, they experience better performance, including higher revenue growth and profitability.
Wow. So I think the data is pretty clear. And again, this is not just Pragmatic saying this. These are third parties that have gone out and studied being market-driven versus being driven by other factors.
That's right.
That said, we have gathered a lot of data ourselves at Pragmatic on this effect and the effect of being market-driven on our clients too. And we'd like to share some of those stats with you.
So a survey that was conducted by an independent third-party research firm called Tech Validate indicated that companies reported a 25% increase in terms of their improvement to product sales. We also heard that companies reported 50% improvement in their CSAT or Net Promoter Scores by taking our training or going through our programs. 61% of our client companies who've adopted Pragmatic and our programs also reported being able to better align with their internal teams, and 55% also reported having much higher confidence in their roadmaps. So becoming market-driven, we know that it doesn't just happen. We also know, as well as you all know, that taking some data to your leadership teams isn't enough to just transform and create a culture around this. We also need to think about several different factors. And one of the things we need to factor in and consider is our people. People within the product team, but also people across our organization.
That's exactly right. So we want to be market-driven. It gives us all these wonderful benefits that we just explored around better confidence in your roadmap, better revenue, faster time to market, more profitability. We want all of that stuff. But how do we get there?
Well, one of the first steps is to create cross-functional buy-in across your various stakeholders.
But that cross-functional buy-in doesn't just happen by magic. In fact, sometimes your key stakeholders like engineering, sales, marketing, finance, and so on will raise objections to moving to this more market-driven approach. And so how do we handle those? Let's take a look. We'll start off with a sales-driven organization. I know some of you work in a sales-driven organization where sales is controlling the roadmap based on what they need to win the next big deal. In an organization where sales has a really strong voice, it is super common for sales to show up and say something like this. They're going to come and say, Amy, I need this one feature to close this deal. You ever heard that?
All the time.
Exactly. So how do we address it?
Well, you could reinforce your strategy. You could see if the thing they're requesting has broader applicability across your market. We typically don't ever want to stand in the way of revenue, but we also don't want to build a bunch of one-off solutions, those one and dones that don't ever scale across our market.
That's right. That's the one versus many thing we were talking about a little while ago.
Exactly.
Well, let's not stop with sales. Let's also go over to engineering. Think about them. Have any of you ever heard this? When the engineering team shows up and says, you know what, Amy, I'd love to work on your roadmap, but we have a mountain of technical debt that we need to go retire, and we need to re-architect our platform, we need to build a new reporting engine, and it's going to be a year before we can build anything that you're asking for.
Heard it many, many a times. But I want to dig into this just a little bit, Paul, because there are many, many times where there is legit technical debt that has to be cleaned up before we can move forward, at least in any sort of sane way. But I think the key here is that we have to have balance between our technical debt and building these new things. And notice the key word here is balance.
That's right. That's right. Sometimes I refer to this as the Cadillac versus Kia problem. Are they thinking that they need to build you a Cadillac when all you're really asking for is a Kia? Maybe. I mean, I don't really care if the system is going to scale to 1 trillion simultaneous users if we are only expecting a few thousand.
That's right. Exactly. Okay, Paul. So what about finance?
Let's take a look. Finance might object to moving to this more market-driven approach by saying, hey, wait a second. It sounds like in this new approach that we're going to have to build something and invest on the come before the revenue actually shows up.
That's right. But that is exactly what happens. That's exactly right. But the job of the product team here is to illustrate the business case and to demonstrate what is the ROI of solving this problem and how will our investment actually pay off for us.
That's right. Then we can make a more data-driven case about why being market-driven is better. Sometimes I used to refer to this as the two sides of the scale. Like if you could picture the old-time scale that had the two sides that would go up and down. Oftentimes, most organizations only listen to one side of the scale. And that's the salesperson or the executive or somebody showing up with a big deal that they want to win. So of course we should go do that, right? Well, the job of the product team is to illustrate the other side of the scale. To say, yes, we could go build this one thing, but let's think about building for the many, the market over here, and all the benefits that could come along with that. That's a data-driven case we need to make with finance, and we need to show our product teams how to make that case.
Exactly.
All right, Amy, we've talked about a bunch of different stakeholders, finance, sales, engineering, and so on. But let's go to what might be the most important stakeholder, and that is the executive team. Mm-hmm. Often executive teams, they want to understand the immediate in-quarter impact to things like revenue, margin, ROI, and so on. So how would we deal with an objection like that?
Like that immediate gratification kind of thing?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, so in this case, there is some truth to that. Whereas if you don't have a market-driven approach today, it may take some time to establish good market research. But that all said, having a voice of the market doesn't require a multi-million-dollar project or a multi-year effort. Just like we do in where we take bite-sized chunks of work in Agile, we can do the same thing. We can be very agile with our research efforts. Think about it. Start small. A couple of interviews, a couple of observations here or there, whatever your qualitative research is. And over time, you should end up with this landslide of market data.
That's right. And worse, if we continue to defer doing the hard work of listening to the market, then what's going to happen is we're going to continue to depend on the loudest voice in the room, the hippo who's waddling around, the squeakiest wheel that's seeking that oil, until somebody breaks the cycle. And we would argue that somebody is you.
That's right. And few things are worse than building something that doesn't resonate with your market, because the hidden costs, fixing the reputational costs to your brand, can be immense. Look at Sonos.
That's right. So being market-driven takes the entire organization. It's not just one person, it's not just your executive team, and it's not just you. But that tops-down push that is provided by getting executive team buy-in for a market-driven approach, that's special. Because when you get that tops-down push from your executive team, it can make or break your success for implementing what we call a market-driven organization.
Yes, that's exactly right, Paul. So we believe that you can take this journey on easy mode, you can take this journey on hard mode, or potentially somewhere in between. And one key aspect, one thing that will really determine which mode you're on, is your executive leadership team's level of buy-in. Now, Paul and I both have experience on both easy mode and hard mode, but let's take a look at a few examples that would demonstrate if your executive leadership team is bought in or isn't bought into this market-driven approach.
That's right. I have an example of hard mode.
All right, go for it.
So a couple years ago, I was brought in to build product management at what you might call a late stage startup here in Austin, Texas, where I live. And up until that point, they were engineering driven and founder driven. Perhaps also a big customer, pretty much everything but market driven. And the founder was very used to just going down the hallway and having a conversation with the engineer about what would be in the next release. Mm-hmm. And so when product management showed up with new ideas about what the market was asking for and so on, as you can imagine, there was a bit of resistance. It took several quarters worth of market research and trust building for us to show that founder and the team at that company that it wasn't just my opinion versus your opinion. You know, I'm not saying that this is what the roadmap should be because that's what I think. This is what the data said. And it's all of us together looking at this market data in a new and productive way. Now, as a result, we eventually did pivot to that more market-driven approach, and it had a happy ending. That company later had a successful exit and was bought by a larger organization in their industry.
Paul, that's a really great example of taking this journey on hard mode. Now I want to talk about the exact opposite. So on the other hand, you are well aware there's a very big client that Pragmatic has worked with who sent their entire product team through our program, including executives and even some engineers. And coming through our program has enabled them to really break down barriers to role clarity, budget challenges, general market research challenges. They've even established some appropriate product team metrics. And through this, I think about a year and a half into their journey, they actually launched a new product that not only exceeded sales revenue expectations, but created huge waves in their product category and in their industry. And it was because this product solved a real problem and it resonated with their market.
That's right. In fact, they actually won some awards for that product.
It's pretty cool.
So I don't know about you. I would much rather play this game on easy mode than hard mode because it sounds like it's a lot more fun, but we would also argue it's a lot more effective.
Yes.
So the question is, how do we create that level of executive team buy-in and support for moving to this more market-driven stance?
That's right. So the first thing you can do is you can share some of the data like we shared at the top of this presentation. We showed you some ROI data and whatnot. The story is very clear. Being market-driven allows companies to make more money. It allows companies to launch new things faster, to have happier customers than those who don't follow this approach. Connect with us if you need some more information on that. We have a plethora of testimonials and referrals from super happy companies and are happy to help you all through that transition. But secondly, it's also about the stakeholders, all the stakeholders that we just reviewed and talked about. And it's about putting this market-driven approach into their language. And what I mean by that is explaining to them, what's in it for them? Why should they care?
Exactly. So let's get everyone speaking the same language with a program like Pragmatic so that you can reduce waste and hopefully also increase your speed.
Another integral part of this transformation is to understand what each stakeholder is going through as they embark on this change. And they may experience change in different ways.
That's right. Every individual experiences change in different ways. They also all start in a different place and move through change at a different pace. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross described this effect in her change curve that you see here, and used it in her work on personal transition in times of grief. Today, the change curve is widely used in business situations to describe the effect of major changes, which could be genuinely traumatic for those that are going through them. Every change creates reactions in those that are undergoing it. Some are positive and some are negative. But it's important to recognize that humans accept change in a non-linear fashion, and sometimes change will happen in fits and starts. In this version of the change curve, we've divided the stages of dealing with change into 4 key stages. Let's talk about those 4 key stages and how you can help your stakeholders through this change curve as they manage their way through a major change like the one we're talking about here today, which is implementing a market-driven approach within your organization.
So starting on the left, the first stage is shock. Shock or denial. So here you will typically see stakeholders in this state of denial or shock, and you might find them saying things like, I know that this is a fad. This whole market-driven thing, we've seen this before. It'll likely come and go. Or maybe they're in a state of shock where they're like, wait, what? We're going to be what? We're implementing a what now? Our recommendation, the best approach here, is that we want to provide context about the change, which is really, really important. And we want to make sure that we have really clear communications, and we're talking about why the change is so important. What's the need?
That's right. I think my favorite quote for this one is, I've seen how this movie ends. Yes. Right? It's almost like, I don't think this is going to be real, so I'm not going to pay any attention to it.
That's right.
After people get through that initial shock phase, they dip into what we call the chaos stage. And here you will typically find that the common reactions are anger, sometimes fear. People might actively resist the change that you're trying to put in place or work against it. Sometimes you might even see what's called malicious compliance, where people say they're supporting you with their words, but if you look at their actions, they're actually doing the opposite.
It doesn't match.
Yeah, it's pretty frustrating. The best approach here is to focus on providing support and a guiding hand, recognizing their legitimate concerns, but also supporting and guiding them through the process of that change.
Okay, so next comes the caution stage. So here you start to see people cautiously, gradually approaching the change, but they're doing it with positive intents. So here we really want to lean into the change. We want to make sure that our approach emphasizes testing and iteration, and that we create an environment where exploration is enabled and, in fact, promoted. And we want to empower them to try new things.
That's right. And then finally, we have the confidence stage. That is where their reaction typically turns to commitment, and they start to see the positive value of this change paying off. Our approach in this final step is to communicate our successes, but also to acknowledge where there might still be resistance and find a sustainable path forward. I also want to recognize that while we're showing this change curve in kind of a linear left to right fashion, it is not at all uncommon that you will have iterative loop backs through the change curve. In this example, somebody got to the caution stage and then they jumped back somewhere into shock or chaos. That happens. Change happens in fits and starts. It happens in a non-linear way. So sometimes, just like we are iterative in our agile approach, we also have to be iterative when working with our stakeholders and thinking about how they deal with change.
That's right. So this whole summit is about the future of product. And one thing is for sure, the world does not stop. The world does not stand still. And as JFK said, change is the law of life. And those who look only to the past or the present are certain to miss the future.
Absolutely. So we've discussed the value of being market-driven, bringing stakeholders on board and helping them through their process of dealing with change. And also, we talked a little bit about how to play the game on easy mode. All of that's wonderful, but we also have to have something else in place to really make this work, and that is having the right infrastructure within our product team, the right types of resourcing and so on to really make this fly.
That's right.
So let's look at some stats that we've gathered from our most recent State of the Industry survey. Georgina and team shared some of these with you in the prior session, but we brought even more to talk about here. So as you've heard, the State of the Industry survey is the most comprehensive, cross-cutting, largest survey of product professionals in the world.
So here we've captured some information about industry standard roles of product managers to other teams. So for example, our data shows that for every one product manager, you will find about 6.8 engineers or developers.
That's right. You'll also find about 4.5 salespeople per product manager and about 2.3 sales engineers.
There are a little over 1.5 QA and engineering managers per product manager and just over 1 project manager per product manager.
That's right. And you can also see that on average, there's just under 1 product marketer for every product manager, and it decreases a little bit for product owners and also user experience.
But again, these numbers are just averages, so don't take them as prescriptive. But they could be really interesting, especially if you find your team's resourcing is off by an order of magnitude.
That's right. This might be something really good to highlight in your next meeting with your executive team if you find that your resourcing is dramatically different than this. It could also be really interesting to see, where does product sit within the organization? Our survey data suggests that over 60% of product teams report up either through a product leader who has a seat at the executive table or directly through the CEO.
That's right. Also, 15% report up through marketing, 7% report up through engineering, or a few other channels such as sales, support, or even IT.
That's right. This is actually an increase from the last time we ran this survey, which reflects the increasing recognition of product as a discipline across many different industries.
You might also find it really interesting to think about how many products the average product manager owns and manages. Our survey showed that 53% of product managers own 3 or fewer products, and the other 47% own more than 4.
That's right. Again, this reflects the broad spectrum of companies that Pragmatic works with in our various programs, and also the ones that responded to our survey. We work with teams that are very diverse. For example, I recently worked with a team in the medical device space that has thousands of products per product manager. But we also have worked with others in the enterprise software space who might only own 1, or maybe even a small part of 1 if it's a much larger platform.
Finally, as you think about your team, it probably makes sense to take a step back and ask yourself, where is their time going? How are they spending their time? Are they spending their time in strategic versus tactical? Are they doing their job? Are they doing somebody else's job? Are they doing everybody's job? But most importantly, where do we want them to be spending their time?
Exactly. The State of the Industry survey shows that on average, product managers spend about 2/3 of their time on tactical work, such as emails and meetings and putting out those fires we talked about earlier. Just under 1/3 of their time is spent strategically.
Yep. So we hear this constant stream of product managers wanting to become more strategic. They feel buried in their tactical, execution-oriented activities that they face day in and day out. In fact, this is one of the biggest challenges that we help teams with today.
And one of the areas that we hope to see teams spending more time on into the future of product management is more time spent interviewing their market, making that direct connection with their buyers and users, and really understanding their problems to truly get that voice of the market into their organization.
On average, product managers spend just under 2 hours per month interviewing existing customers, and a bit more than that talking to potential customers or recent wins or losses.
In all, the data shows that the average product manager spends about 8 hours per month on that direct contact with their market. We don't feel like that is nearly enough. And we encourage those of you that manage teams or will be doing so in the near future to think about how you can free up your team's time to spend more on getting outside so we can get that valuable data back into the house.
Here in just a little bit, we'll discuss some metrics that you can put into place to help reinforce this.
Lastly, we asked some of the participants in this year's State of the Industry survey about where do they see themselves in 5 years. Now, naturally, there were a variety of answers, some of them skeptical about the future, like this one. Where does he see himself? Well, not in product management, because the role has become 5 roles in one, and it's not sustainable for any one person. He says, if I can't find a company that splits out product manager from project manager, business analyst, scrum master, QA engineer, and so on, that he's going to have to shift disciplines, because the role is not sustainable and the physical stress of doing it is taking its toll.
If I'm being honest, I don't blame him. Sounds like him and his team and his leadership team probably need some help.
Yeah.
But it wasn't all negative, certainly. There were a ton of wonderful quotes expressing a lot of positivity about the future as well, such as, I want to be the director of my department. There's a lot of upside at my current company, and if I can grow and advance, I'd love to be here 5 years from now.
Clearly, there are people who both have skepticism about the future, but also look at the future with positivity and something that they are looking forward to, and they want to think about how they can shape it as well. So when you think about shaping the future, let's look at some of the big and small process items that you're going to have to put in place in order to drive that more market-driven approach.
But it's not just about focusing on one or the other, because if that's all you do, you likely won't see the success that you need to see. So let's start with what we're going to call the macro level processes. Macro level processes are like big, overarching, broad, like big ticket, cross-team, cross-functional, cross-company kind of stuff.
Right. So examples of some of that might be creating a common market-driven language or getting everyone speaking the same language on the same framework. Or creating one way of working, like a common product lifecycle or a common framework instead of tools and templates that everyone can always turn to. Maybe it is correcting inconsistencies across business units. So if you have more than one business unit, are they all doing product management in a different way? Could we get that down to one way of working? Or it could be normalizing the amount of time that your product managers and product team are spending on strategic versus tactical work. You know, could we do an internal survey and time study and see if we could turn those dials a little bit to get them to be more strategic in nature? You might also think about developing your product team's budget. So does your budget account for things like getting outside in and going out there to gather that voice of the market? If not, it probably should. Or maybe some of these big process items could include creating a way that product and design and engineering and architecture can all come together and collaborate on finding the best solution to a problem that the team has identified through their research. You don't have to do all these things yourself, but they are things that you should think about as you're considering this change to a more market-driven approach. These big picture items are wonderful, but you can't spend all of your time with your head in the clouds. We also have to get down to that 1 centimeter level and think about some of those micro activities that need to change as well. On the micro side, we think of those micro things as the small, very sort of individual process or procedure oriented type things. They're oftentimes activities that your team needs to undertake in order to become more market driven.
Some great examples of this are market research. Do you have a process in place to support your market research efforts where you are going out and doing both qualitative and quantitative research, whether that be through interviews or observations or surveys or using product analytics data? Or how about thinking about your product lifecycle, your PLC or your PDLC? And do you have standards for things like opportunity assessment? How are you actually assessing all of the new ideas and new feature requests that are constantly coming your way? Or what about things like your strategic product planning, your business planning efforts? Do you have standardization around what that process looks like in different phase gates, should you choose to have phase gates, or the templates and the tools and the way in which you're going to communicate with your stakeholders? How about things like road mapping? Do you have a process in place for road mapping? How often will your roadmaps get updated? What's the cadence? Who does it? What templates are you going to be using? And are you producing things in a way in which your stakeholders can digest them? How about things like standard documented processes for product marketing, such as buyer personas or the buyer experience? Do you have it documented how a buyer goes through their process or what they do and when it happens before they come into contact with your sales team? How about things like positioning? Do you have a process in place to support problem-based positioning so that it's super clear and concise? What problems are you solving? Who are you solving them for? And why does it matter? Or how about things like marketing and sales channel enablement? Do you have documented standards in place for that?
And again, you don't have to do all these things, but these are the types of things, both big and small, that we have to think about as product team leaders to chart that path into the future. So now that we've looked at some of these more micro level activities, let's look at a tool that we've developed here at Pragmatic to help address all of the market-driven activities that you and your team have to take on that we believe are critical for success. And we call it the Pragmatic Framework. Some of you have seen the framework before, and some of you might not have. Think of it as a proven blueprint for listening to the market and, as a result, creating products that people truly want to buy.
You'll notice that the activities are arranged on this gradient from left to right. On the left-hand side, you have activities that are much more strategic in nature. On the right-hand side, you have activities that are much more tactical or execution-oriented.
That's right.
So, for example, on the left-hand side, Paul, you know we might have an activity like road mapping. On the right-hand side, we have an activity to support events.
That's right. Both of which are critical. It's just a matter of where's your team spending their time today. There's also a top to bottom difference within the framework. On the top half of the framework, the activities tend to be more about the markets that we're serving and the business model that we're creating. So up there, you're going to find things like business planning, your business canvas, pricing, for example, are things you're going to find up there. Versus on the bottom half of the framework, you're going to find activities that are a bit more about the products and the technologies that we are creating.
The teams we work with at Pragmatic use the framework for several different purposes. Some teams use it for defining clear roles and responsibilities. Other teams might use it for that, in addition to understanding the right tools and templates and training to create this common language and understanding across their team.
So I often refer to the framework as a Rosetta Stone for product teams. Having everyone speak the same language, regardless of their level of experience in product, is so valuable.
Many of our clients have adapted the framework to their own product life cycle, which we strongly encourage. In fact, Paul and I brought one to share with y'all today. So here's an example from one of our clients who gave us permission to share this with our market. And you can see here that they've divided their product life cycle up into 4 key phases. So for example, they've got a market overview phase. Then they've got an offer and value prop phase. Then you'll see a launch phase. And then lastly, you'll see a support and maintenance phase. Each phase has an associated timing for it. And you'll also notice that they've indicated the key function or functions that are driving these phases or are heavily involved in each of these phases.
And what I love about this particular example is that it illustrates that you don't have to be a product manager to participate in product management. There are a lot of other roles that could or should be involved in making this market-driven approach really fly.
So true. So now take a look at this. And what you're going to see here is we've got a bunch of colors and highlights, but what it's showing you visually is how the different phases of that client's product lifecycle actually map to the specific Pragmatic Framework activities. I'd also like to point out that over here on the right-hand side, you might notice some activities hanging out over there. Those aren't standard. They're actually not part of the standard Pragmatic Framework or the standard language, but this client has added them because they're relevant to their business and the success of their products. So as you can see, you can configure this framework to support your organization and the specific processes which you operate in, but still maintaining the integrity of the framework. In addition to understanding roles and people and what level are we on easy mode, hard mode, macro, micro level processes, we also want to establish some metrics.
That's right. You might be familiar with the saying that you can only manage what you measure. If we want to establish a market-driven discipline, it makes a lot of sense to develop metrics that we could track our performance against that goal. Now, because metrics are not one size fits all, we've divided them here into 3 distinct categories. Metrics that you might use for the organization, for the team, and also for the individual. We want you to think about how you might track these metrics within your own teams.
All right, so let's start at the organizational level. So you can use metrics for product usage. An example might be daily or monthly average users. In general, if products usage is increasing, that means people are getting more value from it, which could be a direct indicator of market-driven behavior. You could also look at customer satisfaction using a tool such as Net Promoter Score. Obviously, revenue and renewal rates could also be something very valuable here, and those will certainly resonate with your CFO.
Exactly. Now, for product teams, I like to establish metrics that support their implementation of market-driven behaviors with their stakeholders. For example, does every product team meeting start off by asking the critical question, what problem are we trying to solve here today? If the answer is no, it probably should, and that's a metric we might want to look at tracking. Are we using the pragmatic framework or something like it to assess and to track our gaps? You could also look at your strategy. Does everyone in the organization have a common view of what our strategy is? If I were to pick 5 people at random walking down the hallway, would they all have the same answer to that question, or would they have 5 different answers?
So at the individual product level, it's important to measure how well or how often they are connecting with the market. At Pragmatic, we describe this process as nihito. Nothing important happens in the office. Now, before you get all worked up, we don't mean that literally, okay? We're using it as a term to describe the behavior of getting out from behind your desk, stepping away from your laptop and immersing yourself in your market. So we suggest that as product managers, we want you to go out there and connect and perform nihito. Go on those visits. These are field visits. Preferably, you're doing these in person. Could be observational-based visits, could be interviewing. Worst case scenario, you do them virtually.
That's right. Now, obviously, we would prefer in person, but if you can only get it virtually, that's a lot better than nothing. I would actually put a quota on my product managers for the number of nihito visits that I expected them to execute each quarter. Typically, I would give them a quota of 10. 10 market visits per product manager per quarter. And if you do all the math, that works out to about 1 market interaction per product manager per week, which we could argue about, but I think it's pretty reasonable. If you're not talking to your market at least weekly, then how are you making decisions about your market that are driven with data and not opinion?
Exactly. I think that sounds great, Paul. And I know from personal experience that you have to start somewhere, whether it's 1 hour a week, whether it's 2 market visits every 2 weeks, whatever that looks like, start somewhere. That's actually more than what a lot of product teams have established already today.
Yeah, so just by coming to this Future of Product Management Summit, you're starting somewhere. Now, we've shared a lot of thoughts with you today about the current state of the industry, about where things are going in the future, and also about what's not going to change, like a strong focus on the market. In closing, we'd like to encourage everybody to take a step back, take a big, deep breath, and remember, every journey starts with the first step.
And a great first step is to go get your Pragmatic Product Manager certification. Or come talk to us. We would love to hear from you.
Now, let's hand it back over to Phil for a couple of closing thoughts.